I want to start by making it clear that I've long held the view that constitutional recognition of Indigenous people is desirable and can be achieved. The great tragedy is that the change we are now being asked to make would damage our system of government and is wrong in principle. The principle I'm talking about is this: the sovereignty of the land on which we meet today derives from the people of this nation, all of them, regardless of race or national origin, and regardless of whether they arrived yesterday or whether they have antecedents who arrived 60,000 years ago. Until now, this idea has led to ever-increasing moves towards strengthening equality of citizenship, which is fundamental to all true democracies. But we are now at a turning point. In the remarks that follow, I'll be making the case that the change proposed at the coming referendum would take us back to the days when racial privilege was this country's official policy. It took us generations to rid ourselves of that blight and replace it with a system that gives growing effect to the idea that everybody should be equal not just before the law, but before those who make the law, our elected members of Parliament. It makes no sense to abandon this principle, which is fundamental to all true democracies, when those who oppose this form of government are on the march internationally. I'll also be making the case that while constitutional recognition of Indigenous people is necessary, this referendum is the wrong way to achieve that goal. It's simply incorrect to equate opposition to an Indigenous voice to Parliament and the Executive with opposition to constitutional recognition of Indigenous people. Most people of goodwill would readily accept a constitutional change that recognised Indigenous people were the first occupants of this continent. But here's the harsh truth about this referendum. Explicit recognition of Indigenous people was actually an afterthought. It was added months after the preliminary wording of the proposed change to the Constitution was made public in July last year. The real purpose of this referendum, and you can see this in the form of words that we'll be voting on, is to change our system of government by injecting a permanent element of racial privilege into the heart of the Constitution. This would risk placing this country in breach of international law. It would also open the door to a New Zealand-style system of co-governance that would kill the doctrine of equality of citizenship. It would give Indigenous Australians and their descendants for all time a second method of influencing public policy that goes beyond the benefits of representative democracy that are already available to all citizens regardless of race. It would constitutionalise a race-based lobby group equipped with a separate bureaucracy that would give Indigenous citizens the ability to have an additional say on every law and administrative decision, not just those relating specifically to Aborigines and Torres Strait Islanders. Constitutional recognition of Indigenous people is a worthwhile goal, but not like this. Because this racial preference would be entrenched in the Constitution, it would be permanent, and that would put Australia at odds with the International Convention for the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, which this country ratified in 1975.
First, it seems that there's going to be a problem. How are you going to define who and who is not an Aboriginal?
I think that's the problem. I think the last thing we want in this country are race laws, race tribunals determining who is an Aborigine and who is not. I don't think we want to go there. I think you take a wrong turn and you abandon equality of citizenship and you hit all this nonsense. Race laws are just an abomination. They should form no part of the Australian statute book.